Guys, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Terri Cecchine, and I am here to present to you my work entitled Female Wrestlers Grappling the Headlocks of Oppression. This is my original research that was done with a variety of female athletes on the Central Coast. So I took a lot of my research from Crane, from Mesner, from Starowski, and what they have to say is that a lot of this recently has been a shift, a desire to show what you can do, so to speak, as a female. And a lot of this is meant to end these perpetuated cycles of gender inequality that Crane says limits the women to only feminine roles. In the sport of female competitors, although it has increased, the number of female participants is still extremely low, and we definitely see that in the sport of wrestling. Starowski in 2010 said that there was 294,000 females across all sports, and this was in 1971. And now, when they did the study in 2002, there was over 2.8 million. And this is across all sports, but that's a rise of 847%. And that is a huge increase, as we can see in the last 40, 50 years of female influence in athletics. So a couple questions I had that were really just standing out to me. What was most important as a female athlete myself, as a wrestler, grappler? I wanted to really understand, why aren't the numbers higher? Why aren't women competing in these sports in larger amounts? So I looked at what the repercussions and obstacles faced by the female athletes were, and how that was not in compliance with Title IX, as Title IX was meant to give equality to all female and male sports. And I also looked at how gender validation affected the female athletes that served in these roles, because they are traditionally male roles. And we're really looking at females who are breaking barriers, who are doing things that females aren't typically meant or thought to do. So some of my goals were to examine first the female athletes in wrestling, and I looked at high school athletes. I examined these young women perceptions of the male-dominated sport. So I asked them a lot of questions about what they thought of it, what other people thought of it. I analyzed the coach relationship with the women. I looked at how they talked, how they communicated, what their rhetoric was like, what their attitudes were, what body language looked like. Unspoken and spoken things are very important when it comes to coaching and working with young athletes, especially females who might not feel that they're in the right place. And also understanding how the current social system shapes our identity. And basically in sport, women aren't expected to do these things. They're not expected to wrestle or box or compete in martial arts. And a lot of this stuff is really new, but it's also really exciting to watch. So the frameworks I used were coming from Oyserman and Mesner. And Oyserman talks about how the environment shapes the way that females and people think of themselves, and how it shapes their thoughts of themselves, which I believe is very applicable to the idea of wrestling, where oftentimes females are in male space and treated certain ways, and that really does shape the way that they see and feel about themselves. Also, Mesner talks a lot about gender discrimination and hegemony, which underlies this idea of gender validation, that you can't just be good at something and be female, you have to be good at something for a female. And that's obviously a huge topic of discussion. What did I do? So I looked at a variety of participants, female wrestlers. There were 71 between the ages of 14 to 17. They were from high schools up and down the Central Coast, and they were recruited from these tournaments, from different areas that I coach with, from people that I work with in the wrestling community. I've been coaching now for about 10 years, and I know a lot of different areas up and down California, and was able to acquire a good database. The students were asked to participate to explore the nature of the experiences that they were having. So I did take data from brand new wrestlers, as well as wrestlers that were 4 years and graduating. I also talked to wrestlers that were going to college to wrestle, because I wanted to see someone that might be more intrigued, might have a different idea than a wrestler that might not be on their way to college. So I also talked to coaches. I was able to get 7 coaches involved, and they were interviewed, and they were asked questions about their perceptions of females in the sport and how this really is changing as we're moving forward. So here's an example of the demographics. It's pretty similar, except for you'll see the 2 high schools have different populations. Aside from that, you can see that the team ratios, we have 4 teams that actually have established girls programs and that have over 10 girls. This was really important because although some of them have been established for 3 or 4 years, they have a large turnout. Some may have been established for 15 years, and that's what's created the strength in their programming. And that's really important as a research and development. We want to know, what is this program? Why is it strong? And how can we share these strengths with other schools? So what did I do? I basically gave out a permission slip, as they were all minors. I had to collect that back. I did a survey, which was a variety of questions that the wrestling coaches gave out for me, or I drove to the schools and did myself. Interviews were done over the phone, and this was done in a variety of time and months with a lot of research assistants and a lot of support. We transcribed all those interviews. We were able to put all the data into coding. We noted all of these very similar patterns and strong patterns, and then we cross-categorized and analyzed the data. And then the findings were recorded, and I disseminated those back to the coaches to actually show them what would be the best practices for their school. And we're waiting on results right now. So this is about 6-7 months ago that this happened. So we'll be able to work with these schools for the next couple of years and see what happens. So what did the measures cover? They looked at participant characteristics, demographics, educational aspirations. Again, that has to deal with environmentals, just like feelings of belonging. We looked at academic encouragement from the coach and academic and substance abuse advice. Again, that's to do with environmental. And we also looked at academic success. Our interview measures were a little more in depth and a little more persistent in the idea of social norms for females. So some of the example questions were, does male pressure exist? And if so, what are the results of their perceptions? Can you describe your role in the team? Do you think more emphasis is placed on body appearance over skill? And this was especially important because oftentimes in a singlet, women are treated differently. Women are looked at differently. They're not treated as athletes, they're treated as things, items, instead of people. And this is something that these young girls can see. They can see it when they're 16, 15, 14. And this is really interesting because it really defines their identity. It makes them feel certain ways about themselves. And this is where I want to come in and really define what that means. So for the coaches, we asked a little bit different questions. What was their experience like in wrestling? How have they seen this develop? How does it affect the girls versus the boys? And what do they see? And we used Deduce to do our content analysis. That was our software. And so some of the things that we took from Deduce was our common themes. And so we did some code occurrence and some cross-examining. And we found that there was a lot of overlay between positive body image and sexuality. So oftentimes they were talking about things with their peers, but not with their coaches. Often these athletes did not have female coaches. They had male coaches, and this made the situation a lot different as well. They wouldn't talk with them about things that they might talk up to their volleyball coach about, or their basketball coach who might be a woman. So that's definitely an interesting idea that comes into male sport, is how is the coaching relationship and how does that develop? What has to be there? Okay, and so there are a lot of other things stood out, like violence and physicality. A lot of the girls thought that it was a violent sport prior to joining, and then their perceptions really changed. A lot of them felt like they were being treated negatively, that they actually weren't being put on the mat and treated fairly. So the answers were very skewed in a way that told a really clear story of misplacement. Okay. Some more results is that we saw gender validation. There was 193 excerpts with that, 137 involving sexuality, lack of female space, so not feeling of belonging. Again, going back to the origin and theory of environmental pressures, including or influencing self. There was 125 excerpts where they didn't feel that they had space. Positive body image. So 118 actually talked about how it made them feel like they had a really good image of themselves. And then 93 excerpts involved images or excerpts of violence. As far as what we discussed or what I found, gender validation was definitely one of the biggest topics, and it was both ways. It went back and forth. Some of them said, for example, I feel like it's really important to feel it yourself rather than hear it from somebody else. You don't need a guy to tell you you're strong. You know that you're strong. And I think that that's where the self-confidence comes in this sport that has developed. This young lady now knows that she's strong. And she doesn't need someone else to tell her. And that's definitely a positive characteristic. The next person, or one of the other girls, said, when somebody tells me that, I correct them, because I don't think that it should be that I'm strong for a girl. It should just be like, I think that I'm strong. So I think that's really important, that they're already understanding that they're being gender identified, and they're really understanding their role at such a young age when they should be exploring every role. Female space was also something that was really positive. So several things in the positive way. Some people said it's nice to be able to be a female and still have the opportunity to participate. But a lot of people had negative thoughts about the space, saying, our practice times are way later. We don't get the same equipment. We don't get the same room. We don't get to access to lift weights. How do they expect us to do well if we don't have access to the same resources? And that's an issue of Title IX. A lot of these schools do not give their females the correct resources and space, which is a huge legality. So positive body image was also one of them that came out. I'm sorry about that. Let me move this. So body image was one that body image. There are two, positive and negative. So one of them was where they really felt self-confident. They felt that it helped them gain the ability to wear more clothes with confidence. It gave them the ability to talk and be proud of their opinion and their voice. Other times they felt very negative. They felt that the singlet was too tight, that it was too revealing, that it made that sexual component very real. And this is something that we talked a lot about, because the confidence comes from what you wear from the inside, how you're treated in your environment, and how you're pushed up by your peers. And oftentimes, none of that was happening, or something was missing. And that was a huge, huge part of it. So violence was one of the things that also occurred. And that basically was some examples of how when girls would talk to them, they now thought that they were too strong and too violent. They thought that they weren't going to be able to be friends with some of them. They thought that if they were to play fight, they might hurt them. So a lot of these outside people who aren't involved in the group really do have a misconception of what it means to be involved in the sport. And sexualization was one of the other themes that was revealed itself. And a lot of people reported that the sexual identity, the idea of that you have to be a lesbian or bisexual to be in a grappling sport or a sport that's male dominated, was very apparent. They very much thought that it had to be one way or the other way, that you couldn't be feminine and be part of this world. And a few of the girls started to see and realize that that just wasn't true. And they reported that, as this one says, it made me realize that if you are, say, lesbian, it doesn't really matter if you're wrestling a girl, because you're wrestling. It's not that they really think it's all about the sexual stuff. I know a few girls that are bisexual and lesbian, and they say it doesn't really matter that you're wrestling girls. I don't think it's good. It doesn't make them uncomfortable or anything. So I think that's positive to be able to talk about that at such a young age and be comfortable in your identity. Again, it's all about developing identity with these young girls in this sport and creating the kind of women that they're going to become later in their life. Over-sexualization was also something that was brought up, and it was torn. Few of the girls said that yes, they feel like they're targeted, that they're looked at, and then other girls said no, if I'm doing well, I'm winning, that's all I really see is being congratulated for my skill. So in conclusion, the big thing is that the buy-in needs to be recognized and reshaped from this traditionally hegemonic world and policy. So a lot of these people have been in this sport for a really long time. They're watching it change. They might have a little fear of how it's changing, but really need to be a little more accepting of it. The females coming in are strong. They have the ability and the potential to be great athletes and great attributes to the schools that they're joining. As the sport grows, more of the success of female athletes will depend on the allies. So people need to encourage rapport. Parents need to come out. Mentors need to come out. Females that used to wrestle at their schools need to come out and help support their teams. And that's really going to help the sport grow. So more recommendations is, again, the role modeling, supporting from peers, acceptance and equality from the community. So what I see over the past few years is a huge buy-in for this. States all across the country are now recognizing it as an official sport. They're sanctioning state tournaments, and that's what we need to do. We need to continue to grow this in a way that women will have the same opportunity as men in this sport. So thank you for your time, and have a good day.